All right, once again, I'd like to thank you for watching these videos of mine. And if you're on YouTube watching this, I recommend checking out my website here, www.danceofthecosmos.com. Again, my name is Dan Hendricks, and today we are talking about Saturn. This is of our Grahas series. This is part 4, which is looking at the planetary descriptions given in Brihat Parasara Hora Sastra. So this is video 4.7. Seventh planet is that of Saturn. In the natural order of the planets, Saturn is the 7th planet. So let's go ahead and let's look at our friend Saturn. All right, so what do we know about Saturn already? We know Saturn is cruel, Saturn is neuter, and Saturn represents the servant. This is very important. Saturn represents the masses. Saturn represents the servant. We'll be coming back to this. Saturn is tamasic and looking down. Saturn is about that idea of seeing where he's at, and also about, if he's climbing a mountain, he's looking down and seeing the things that might possibly befall him, the troubles that we're dealing with. Again, we'll come back to that also with Saturn. Saturn is about 7th house, is about the masses and kind of about letting go of the things that are to help us move forward in life. And Saturn is the quadruped. Saturn's form is that of a quadruped. So we know that, which means that Saturn is about bearing the burden. Again, we'll probably come back to that as well. Seeing a theme here, huh? And then Saturn represents the intelligence of simplicity. Well, Saturn represents the intelligence of simplicity. Why? Well, because Saturn here, you'll see these words, and gosh, this sounds kind of bad, right? Saturn's indolent. What does indolent mean? Indolent is like the it's like not wanting to do anything unless you absolutely have to do something. And that's kind of when we're talking about the quadruped of Saturn, when we're talking about this idea of indolent. We're talking about someone who is like not necessarily lazy. That is one kind of synonym of indolent. But it's someone who's just not going to do anything unless he has to do something. Saturn, because Saturn is tamasic. Saturn is, well, I'll do it when I have to do it. And then also, what do we know about Saturn? This is so important. One of the most important things to understand about Saturn is lame. And when we talk about lame kind of means like injured, but lame kind of means like incapable. Because whatever Saturn is in our birth chart, one of the wonderful qualities, okay, that's a little sarcastic, it's not a wonderful quality at all. Wherever Saturn's placed in your chart is going to represent an area where we are lame, an area where we feel we are incapable of being able to go, or some place that a lot of burdens are created, where we feel that that's our burden, our responsibility. And sometimes it feels like that lameness of Saturn makes us feel like, gosh, I have this huge burden because Saturn's a quadruped. I have this huge thing that I have to do that is just, and I don't think that I'm capable of it. So Saturn represents this idea of in us of our incapability. Saturn, because he's looking down, like I talked about, and he's a tamasic planet, and tamasic energy can mean only waiting to exert yourself at a certain time. It's like the energy of inertia. But tamasic can also represent the darker sides of reality. And Saturn, being that he's looking down and he's tamasic and he's lame, and also because Saturn is yellow-eyed, it's really this idea of Saturn is seeing all the negative things that can happen in this world. And Saturn actually is the karaka for our griefs, the karaka for our misfortunes in life, and the things that we have to deal with, the burdens that we have to bear. We have to use our intelligence of simplicity to be able to bear these burdens, like one step at a time. This is what I have to do now. Now, why, when I say yellow-eyed, do I think, why did I say that that's like seeing the bad things in life? Well, what we know of, and medically, if there is a yellowing of the eyes, usually means that there is a serious disease condition going on, whether that be jaundice, cirrhosis, problems with the liver will cause this, a yellowing of the skin. And so it's that idea of So with Saturn being yellow-eyed, and eyed with a D at the end, not eyes, but eyed, meaning that like how he's seeing the world is he's seeing all the terrible things that can go wrong. Because that's what the idea, the tamasic energy, and that's looking down, is Saturn is just seeing all these things, and it's this, he's going to make us feel lame. He's going to make us feel incapable of what it is. Because, well, let's be honest here, you know, there has to be one of the, let's see, astrology represents all of these, it kind of represents the totality of existence. Saturn represents that totality of existence, of that portion of it where our griefs and our misfortunes are. But it also gives us the ability, because of this quadruped nature of, there's two ways you can kind of use this energy of Saturn. So yes, Saturn represents our griefs and our misfortunes, but it's also the way that we make it through these griefs and these misfortunes, because Saturn represents those things, those negative karmas that we're going to experience. Saturn represents the ability that we make it through. And how do we make it through it? There's no other way than to just bear the burden. You know, it's our cross to bear, that we're going to drag that cross across the beach as we're walking. It's just what we have to do. And that's the way that we deal with the things in our life, that, because Saturn represents those things that we can't overcome. Mars represents those negative karmas that we have to fight to get through, that we're going to get dirty, we're going to get beaten and bruised, but we can make it out the other side. Saturn is just like, well, it's large toothed, it's lame, it's incapable, or the only way that it's incapable of making that karma go away. It's about, okay, this is what I have to deal with this lifetime. This is the cold hard reality of this situation. And large tooth and Vata, these two I would say are a combination here, because what Vata can make something irregular. That's one of its qualities. And especially when we're talking about Saturn, it's definitely that quality that's irregular, because large tooth is an irregular size of something that's kind of normal for everybody. Most people have medium sized teeth, normal sized teeth. Saturn representing large teeth is just like represents our irregularities. And again, irregularity is a certain lameness to our constitution. So if you have Saturn influencing your ascendant, influencing your first house, if you have Saturn sitting in that first house, perhaps there's parts of you that are irregular. Maybe if Saturn is sitting there, because each Rashi is said to represent a part of the body, and let's say that Saturn is sitting in Taurus. Taurus represents the face. And maybe Saturn is also there with the moon, or maybe Saturn is there with the second lord also, which second lord has something to do with the face. Then maybe this is somebody that literally has large teeth. Or maybe they have a long-bodied here, long, thin face also. And maybe it's a little bit irregular, because Vata represents that energy of irregularity. And because Vata is quickly changeable, and it's about the space that things, because Vata is the space and the air element, and so the space and air element can very much change in form. It can represent forms that are not very well balanced. And so what we see with Saturn, with lame and with long-bodied, thin, and Vata and large tooth, is this idea of it's kind of irregular. It's going to make something that's kind of an idea on the physical idea. But if we think about thin and we think about long-bodied also, well, first we'll talk about thin. Thin can mean because thin means easy to break, which that's something that Saturn can definitely show, is like that ability that, you know, it's like I've just gotta make do with what I can, because if times are lean or times are thin, like we might not have a lot of resources, which is what Saturn might represent. It's like, this is just kind of what I have to do. So thin can represent, you know, the physical structure of the body, which a Vata personality, if you know, or I'm sorry, a Vata body type is a body type that is typically really short or really tall. It's very light. very light, someone that represents, if you see a thin person, they probably have a Vata constitution. And so Saturn being long bodied, that's another irregularity, like large tooth. So Saturn people can be more long. If you see a tall, skinny person, that is someone with the Vata constitution, possibly Saturn influencing a lot of factors that would deal with the size of the body in somebody's birth chart. So, and then long bodied also, Saturn is about endurance. Saturn is about going the long haul, because Saturn is that quadruped and dealing with the things in life that we have to deal with. So, because Saturn's tamasic, Saturn's looking down. Saturn is lame. He represents some of our bad karmas and just dealing with it. So long-bodied, it's like you're going to go the long haul. You're willing to take the, you're willing to look down. You're looking step by step. You're going to do things. You're a quadruped. It's that quadruped energy, and he's going to go the long haul. He's going to go the distance, and he doesn't care if it's, he'll be thin if he has to. He doesn't need to be. Saturn's not looking at things like, how do I get better? Saturn's like looking at things like, what do I have to do now? And so I can go the distance. And Saturn, believe it or not, Saturn represents greatness. And Saturn represents greatness not out of inspiration because I want to be the greatest thing. I can see how I'm looking up and I can see the greatest thing. Saturn represents greatness because I'm looking down. Because I know my parameters. I know what it is that I cannot do. And I know the only thing I can do is be where I'm at. Because Saturn is about like, let's go, let's just take it one step at a time. So Saturn represents greatness because you'll see all the things that can go wrong. You'll know what can go wrong, and you'll know that there's only one step to take, and that's to move forward. It's not going to be paralyzed, because if all you're doing is looking up, you might not see all the problems in the world. Saturn, since he knows what can go wrong, he knows that, and he has that and represents that quadruped energy, that ability to go forward even in thin times, even, so it's going to go the long way. It's yellow-eyed, so it sees those problems. But it's Vata, it's kind of got the energy to go there. And now, finally, when we're talking about Saturn, the one last thing I haven't talked about yet is coarse hair. Again, hair, when we talked about the sun, of little hair, sun just not really caring about it. Saturn with coarse hair, what we're talking about is he's just going to let things be the way they are, and he doesn't care. Like, when I think of coarse hair, I think of dirty hair. I think of split ends. I think of hair that is unmanaged. It's like, okay, I'm not going to worry about the little things. I'm just going to let the little things be the way they are, because it doesn't matter. I have greatness, great things that I need to achieve. And so I'm just going to let things go. And what's funny, if you see somebody with Saturn, for example, that is influencing somebody's second house very strongly, or their second lord, which are, or even influencing Venus very strongly. Well, those are all things. Venus deals with luxuries. Venus deals with fine, nice things like clothing. Second house deals with clothing. If you see Saturn influencing that, you might see somebody, this isn't always guaranteed, but you might see someone that wears ragged clothing. Somebody that will wear the same shirt for 20 years. They'll have the same clothes they've had forever, and they're falling apart, and their pants are patched, or they're ripped, or things of that nature. It's used clothing that's just worn and torn and ragged. That's a Saturn type energy, and that's kind of what the idea, when I think of coarse hair, that's what I think about, that energy of Saturn, of just like, I don't care about this stuff. It can just get worn away, because that's not what's important. Because Saturn it's that intelligence of simplicity. It's like, I'm not going to get involved. I don't care with what my hair looks like. That's not important to me. I don't care how I look. I have things to do. I have big goals to achieve. I have that one goal, because Saturn, we'll talk about this also, that Saturn takes the longest to transit, because he's the planet that's furthest out from the sun, which means he takes the longest to transit around your natal chart. It takes about 27 to 30 years. So Saturn represents slowness. Saturn represents taking our time. That's kind of what the idea of indolent is about taking our time to do things. And so and its coarse hair. It's like, I'm just going to go about things. I'm going to take the time. I'm going to focus. Because Saturn is actually the Karaka of time. I'm in the Karaka of long time, long-bodied time. And I'm willing to stay in there for the long haul. Not going to worry about, because I know that what I have to do is this goal, this one thing. I'm looking down. I'm going step by step. I'm the quadruped. I'm just going to bear the burden of what I have to do so I can get there. So this is kind of what we see with the energy of Saturn. This is why Saturn is a strongly feared planet, because Saturn is the Karaka of fear. It's the Karaka of looking down. Saturn represents all of that nature, but you also have to realize that all these planets are multi-leveled. Our understanding of these planets needs to be that multi-leveled. See, you'll notice that when I talked about, in the first 3 times I talked about Saturn, I didn't want to talk about this idea of fear. I didn't want to talk about this because there's a lot of gloom and doom when it comes to Saturn. But what needs to be understood about that is, yes, Saturn does represent those misfortunes and those grief and sorrow and the things in this world that are lame, and us just having to work with that, because us as humans, we are not perfect beings. Happiness, you can't have happiness without unhappiness. I mean, the idea of Saturn is, it's like, so Saturn representing our griefs and those bad things in this world. You cannot, if we didn't have Saturn, if we didn't have Rahu, if we didn't have Ketu, if we didn't have Mars, if we didn't have all these cruel planets in the world, we wouldn't able to be happy, because you can't have happiness. You can't see black. If everything was white, then how you wouldn't be able to see, you wouldn't appreciate white, because everything was white. You know, you need black, you need darkness so you can appreciate the light. And Saturn represents that darkness, but Saturn, that's not all he represents. He represents being able to deal with that darkness. And how do we deal with that darkness? We just take it one step at a time. We go the distance. We know we're not perfect. We know that. And so that is my definition of Saturn, or my explanation of Saturn's energy through what is given in Brihat Parasara Hora Sastra. And I thank you for taking the time to watch this, and namaste.